25. U.S. boycotts Moscow Olympics.
And I have notified the Olympic Committee that with Soviet invading forces in Afghanistan, neither the American people nor I will support sending an Olympic team to Moscow.
The boycott was a response to Soviet occupation in Afghanistan. The U.S. and 50 other nations boycotted the Moscow Olympics. However, the boycott by the United States had no profound effect on the Soviet Union. Carter's decision left some bitterness between the Olympic organizers and the athletes. In 1984, the Soviet Union boycotted the Olympics in Los Angeles in response to the boycott in 1980. '24. Failed U.S. attempt to save hostages in Tehran.
Operation Eagle Claw, initially meant to rescue 52 American diplomats and embassy staff who had been held hostage in the embassy since November 1979.
The hostage-taking was a dramatic way for the student revolutionaries in Tehran to declare a break with Iran's past and end to American influence in its affairs. Carter's extremely flawed attempt to rescue the hostages ultimately led to his defeat against Ronald Reagan in the 1980 presidential election. The students freed the hostages on January 21, 1981, just hours after Ronald Reagan took office.
23. Eruption of Mount St. Helens.
Good evening once again, everyone. 8 people are now known dead this evening following the massive eruption of Mount St. Helens early today. That eruption has radically changed the look of the peak, destroying a large portion of it. Geologists say this is by far the strongest eruption in the latest series, and it continues tonight. Channel 2's Essex Porter has the story.
The eruption killed 57 people in the lateral blast. Shipping was stopped on the Columbia River and some vessels were stranded. For a limited time, some people living near the eruption suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome, depression, troubled sleep, irritability, and a sense of powerlessness.
'22. John Lennon's assassination.
Why did you kill John Lennon?
I thought by killing him, I would acquire his fame, and I fired at his back 5 steady shots.
John Lennon was assassinated, which in contrast to his role as a peace activist and pacifist, compounded his legacy. Also, the hope that the Beatles, one of the most beloved and important bands of all time, could never reunite, which broke the hearts of millions. 20. CNN debuted.
The news channel's programming is the news as it happens, and information that all Americans can use.
CNN became the first channel to provide 24-hour television news coverage and the first all-news television network in the United States. On March 5th, Turner announced that the consent order had been worked out with the RCA in federal court, allowing CNN to begin operations on June 1st as scheduled. CNN allowed the American public to access information like never before. 20. Assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan.
It doesn't make much sense, Henry. He puts you here and then he runs around with a big tongue. President Reagan!
There were no fatalities in the immediate aftermath of the attack. Ronald Reagan was shot in the chest just below the left arm. He suffered a punctured lung and heavy internal bleeding, but prompt medical attention allowed him to recover quickly. However, the attempt still shocked the nation. The attempt had great influence on Ronald Reagan's popularity. Polls indicated his approval ratings to be around 73%.
19. MTV aired. The first videos had small budgets and production values to match, but kids were hooked, and the clever videos like Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer was innovative. Music videos soon became the most innovative thing on TV. Some like Take On Me, which stepped between reality and the world of illustration, set new standards for special effects and animation. The videos sold records, and the record companies began spending money to make the videos slicker and more stylish. Michael Jackson's 1.5 million Thriller video helped make the album the best seller of all time. The styles shown on MTV were soon seen everywhere because people began dressing like what they saw on MTV. The first video that played on MTV was The Video Killed the Radio Star, and this portrayed how TV was taking over. IBM Personal Computer first released. IBM PC and the appointment of John R. Opel as CEO in 1981 coincided with the beginning of a new era in computing. Thanks to the birth of the IBM Personal Computer, or PC, the IBM brand began to enter homes, small businesses, and schools. Though not a spectacular machine by technological standards, the IBM PC brought together all the most desirable features of a computer into one small machine.
17. First woman Supreme Court Justice.
After very careful review and consideration, I will send to the Senate the nomination of Judge Sandra Day O'Connor of Arizona Court of Appeals for confirmation as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
In February 1981, Justice Porter Stewart indicated he would retire from the Supreme Court in June. Reagan asserted his intent to name a woman to fill the upcoming vacancy. Attorney General William French Smith submitted the name of 4 women for consideration. One was Sandra Day O'Connor, who had served on the Arizona Court of Appeals for less than 2 years. She had fewer legal credentials than the other 3 women on the list, but she had the backing of a Supreme Court Justice, William Rehnquist, and the endorsement of the Arizona Senator, Barry Goldwater. O'Connor became an inspiration to women everywhere.
16. AIDS virus discovered.
Disease called AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, sounds less than deadly, more like a diet pill. AIDS has struck only a reported 1,500 people, but it has killed almost 600 of them.
The first cases of AIDS were shown in homosexuals, so many called AIDS the gay disease. Some researchers began calling this condition GERD, meaning gay-related immune deficiency. This terminology influences both the medical profession and the public to perceive the epidemic as limited to gay men, with serious long-term consequences for women, heterosexual men, homophiliacs, drug addicts, and children. The disease was not talked about openly. President Ronald Reagan did not discuss AIDS in a public forum until a press conference 4 years into the epidemic, by which time more than 12,000 Americans had already died. People with the disease were routinely evicted from their homes and schools, fired from their jobs, and denied health insurance. AIDS itself changed as well, from a disease that killed gay men and drug addicts to a disease that affected almost as many women as it did men worldwide. The death toll today is 25 million and counting. 15. U.S. Embassy in Beirut is bombed. President Ronald Reagan on April 14th denounced the vicious terrorist bombing as a cowardly act, saying that this criminal act on diplomatic establishment will not deter us from our goals of peace in the region. The suicide bombers crashed a bus full of explosives into the lobby of the embassy. At the time, there were tensions in Lebanon between the pro-government and the pro-Syrian factions. The bombers opposed the peacekeeping forces in Lebanon and killed 241 American servicemen in their attack.
14. Sally Ride becomes the first U.S. woman in space. Sally Ride was one of the first women in space, and 4 new guys launched into orbit when she was a member of Challenger's crew, which lifted off June 18, 1983. She embarked on a mission that was very mysterious and controversial. She made sure every girl got an equal opportunity to explore science. In the words of President Obama, Sally's life showed us that there are no limits to what we can achieve, and I have no doubt that her legacy will endure for years to come. 13. Motorola's first mobile phone is launched. The Motorola Dynatac 8000 hit stores in 1983. It was the first mobile phone retailing for $3,995, ensuring that only the 1% of people could afford it. Even though the majority of people could not afford the phone, Motorola achieved what seemed to be impossible and forever changed the world we live in.
12. Richard Ramirez, Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas in 1960. He became known to the public as the Night Stalker. He was an American serial killer who, over a 2-year rampage, raped and tortured more than 25 victims and murdered more than a dozen in their homes. When he was eventually caught in 1984, the whole country was relieved.
Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil.
11. Iran-Contra scandal. The Iran-Contra affair began in 1985 when President Ronald Reagan's administration supplied weapons to Iran in hopes of securing the American hostages held in Lebanon by the terrorists loyal to the Iranian leader. However, the public was not made aware of this until 1986. This scandal came out after Watergate, and the American public was shocked and betrayed once again. It was finally found out that the National Security Advisor had personally authorized the diversion of money to the Contra rebels while withholding the information from President Reagan. This scandal created more distrust between the American public and the government.
Mr. President, you have stated flatly, and you stated flatly again tonight, that you did not trade weapons for hostages. And yet, the record shows that every time an American hostage was released, last September, this July, and again just this very month, there had been a major shipment of arms just before that. Are we all to believe that was just a coincidence?
Chris, the only thing I know about major shipments of arms, as I've said, everything that we sold them could be put in one cargo plane and there would be plenty of room left over.
10. Space Shuttle Challenger explodes. The explosion was one of NASA's darkest tragedies. On the 10th launch on January 28, 1986, the shuttle exploded 73 seconds after liftoff, killing the 7 crew members. The accident changed the space program forever. Many cultural problems at NASA were brought to light, such as failing to voice all problems to the launch decision team. The commission also said that the shuttle's proposed flight rate was unsustainable given the size of the workforce.
9. U.S. bombs Libya. On April 14, 1986, the United States launched multiple airstrikes against Libya in retaliation for the Libyan sponsorship of terrorism against the American troops and citizens. Even before the operation had ended, President Reagan went on television to discuss the airstrikes. He said, "When citizens are abused or attacked anywhere in the world, we will respond in self-defense. Today we have done what we've had to do. If necessary, we shall do it again." 8. Black Monday.
Stock prices plunged even more than they did on Black Tuesday of 1929.
A chain reaction of market distress sent global stock exchanges plummeting in a matter of hours. In the United States, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 22.6% in a single trading session, a loss that remains the largest one-day stock market decline in history. At the time, it also marked the sharpest market downturn in the United States since the Great Depression. The Black Monday events also served to underscore the concept of globalization, which was still quite new at the time, by demonstrating the unprecedented extent to which financial markets worldwide had become intertwined and technologically interconnected. Black Monday led to a number of noteworthy reforms, including exchanges developing provisions to pause trading temporarily in the event of rapid market sell-offs. In addition, the Federal Reserve's response set a precedent for the central bank's use of liquidity to stem financial crisis. 7. DNA first used to convict criminals. In 1987, Florida rapist Tommy Lee Andrews became the first person in the U.S. to be convicted as a result of DNA testing. DNA forever changed the way criminals are convicted. While genetic matches are extremely reliable in fingering criminals, they are virtually foolproof in exonerating the innocent. 240 convictions have been overturned in 33 states and the District of Columbia, according to the Innocence Project, which is a nonprofit advocacy group that works to free the wrongly convicted. 17 people have been released from death row after DNA evidence cleared them.
No two individuals have the same DNA pattern.
6. U.S. shoots down Iranian airliner.
Understandable accident to shoot and think that they were under attack from that plane.
The government of the Islamic Republic of Iran considers this a premeditated act of aggression and a premeditated, cold-blooded murder.
In 1988, a U.S. Navy ship exchanged fire with a small Iranian ship in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. Navy kept ships there to protect oil trade routes. As the American and Iranian ships fought, Iran Flight 655 took off from nearby Dimbar Abbas International Airport bound for Dubai. The airport was used for both civilian and military aircraft. The U.S. ship mistook the civilian airliner for a smaller, much faster F-14 fighter jet. The U.S. fired 2 surface-to-air missiles, killing all 290 passengers and crew members on board. The horrible incident brought Tehran closer to ending the war. Even though shooting down Iran Flight 655 was an accident, this was not seen this way by Tehran. This led to much more tension between the U.S. and Iran. 5. Pan Am Flight. The 1988 bombing of the Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland was a terrorist attack connected to the bombing of Libya. All 259 passengers and crew of the flight were killed, and this included 31 passengers who were students from the University of Syracuse. Though the flight held passengers from 21 countries, the bombing of the Pan Am flight hit the United States especially hard, not only because 179 of the 259 people on board were Americans, but because the bombing shattered Americans' sense of safety and security. Americans were scared by the unknown danger of terrorism.
4. George H.W. Bush is elected president. In 1988, Bush defeated Democratic rival Michael Dukakis to win the White House. In office, he launched successful military operations against Panama and Iraq. However, his popularity at home was marred by an economic recession. A key focus of Bush's presidency was foreign policy. He began his time in the White House as Germany was in the process of reunifying, the Soviet Union was collapsing, and the Cold War was ending. Bush would be credited with helping to improve the U.S. and Soviet relations.
3. Galileo Space Shuttle. Galileo made excursions as far out in the solar system as the asteroid belt, allowing scientists to make up the first close-up studies of the 2 asteroids. Galileo scientists were fortunate to be the only ones with a direct view of the comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 fragment impacts on Jupiter. All of this was prior to the primary missions of sending an atmospheric probe into Jupiter's atmosphere and studying Jupiter, its satellites, and its magnetosphere for 2 years with the orbiter. This was a huge advancement in the space exploration, and scientists used this new information to continue studying the vast universe.
2. San Francisco earthquake.
A strong motion earthquake emanated from a location 60 miles south-southeast of San Francisco, near Loma Prieta, in the Santa Cruz mountain range.
The earthquake ended decades of tranquility in the San Francisco Bay region. It was a wake-up call to prepare for more potentially devastating shocks. Since 1989, the work of the U.S. Geological Survey and other organizations have improved understanding of the systematic threat in the Bay region, prompted awareness of earthquake hazards, and contributed to more effective strategies to reduce the earthquake loss. These efforts will help reduce the impact of the future large earthquakes in the San Francisco Bay region. 1. The Berlin Wall falls. The Berlin Wall was more than just a barrier and a physical division of East and West Berlin. It was a symbolic boundary between communism and capitalism. Its fall in 1989 was joyously celebrated by the free world. A mass of people congregated on both sides and chipped away at the wall with hammers, small tools. East and West Berliners greeted one another to celebrate. The fall of the Berlin Wall symbolized the end of the Cold War.
Und nichts anderes! Wow. Und nichts anderes!